Hey, awesome students. I hope you guys are having a great week. Today, we're going to be taking a look at learning disabilities and what this broad topic actually means and what it covers. So, what is a learning disability? These are students who have either average or above average intelligence, but there's a gap between their intelligence and their achievement. And this underachievement, it's not because they're not trying or because they have teachers who aren't doing what they need to, or there's cultural or language differences that are taking place. They have difficulty understanding and or using spoken and written language, doing mathematical calculations, coordinating movements, or even directing attention. So how are they going to be identified? The first way is what we call an IQ discrepancy, and students are going to demonstrate a significant gap between their potential, which is their IQ score, what they should be able to do, and what their academic achievement is showing they are actually doing. The biggest problem with this is it takes years for a gap to become large enough for students to qualify for services. The other way they're identified is through response to intervention, which we've been talking about before. And when you have students, as you're moving them up those 3 tiers of RTI, and they're just not responding to these intervention services. And so the good thing about this is it helps identify students much sooner, prevents years of academic failure. Teachers already have the data necessary to move things forward. And so RTI is actually a really good way to identify. So there's a couple types of different disabilities. The first is a reading disability. And these are students who have difficulty processing written language, recognizing combinations of letters. They'll struggle to decode words. They're so focused on sounding out and decoding what each word means that by the time they've lost the sentence, they don't know what they've read. So it reduces their comprehension. Then there's also students who have writing disabilities, and this could be difficulty producing the written language, or students who struggle with the physical mechanics of writing, or sometimes struggle to get thoughts on paper. I tell my students in class it's a long way to go from your brain to your hand, and so things can get lost on the way when there's a writing disability. The last type is a mathematic disability, and these are difficulty understanding math concepts, memorizing number facts, performing calculations, and then struggling to apply these math rules consistently and recognize unreasonable errors that they can sometimes make in math. Now, the thing is, there is going to be overlap between the reading, writing, and math disabilities. 1/3 of students with learning disabilities have problems in more than one area. So most of the time we'll see an overlap of reading and writing, and the reason is because they're using the same language skills. And oftentimes these students who have these difficulties in language processing, it can also impact math, because math, especially as you're moving into the older grades, it requires a lot of reading, the math problems. So the students, they're trying to figure out what the question's even asking, and so it gives them difficulty in the math as well. So common characteristics when we're looking at these kids. And remember, each one is an individual, and this isn't going to be the same for all of them, but there are some things we can look for. One is expected underachievement and academic deficits. Another is resistant to instruction, and sometimes these students have problems with visual processing, so distinguishing between different letters or an object from its background. Sometimes letters and numbers may slide around on a page. Oftentimes when we think of things, and you'll see this in the dyslexia video later, when we think of dyslexia, we think of students just flipping letters around, B's and D's, P's and Q's, 2 and 5. However, with dyslexic children, they describe it as if the letters and words are floating across the page. And so you'll have that issue as well. You also have some problems with auditory processing. So difficulty blending words and segmenting words, or when others do it for them. A tough time hearing those sounds, difficulty picking rhyming words, or alliteration. And then there's also problems with auditory memory. So verbal instructions. You've given them 3 steps. They remember step 1, can't remember the other 2. Or remembering a story, the sequence of items in a story, or repeating a series of items. So these students, they tend to process information much slower than their peers. Other characteristics, they're going to have problems with what we call working memory. And so when the working memory is that shorter piece in your brain, so when you're having students sound out a word, and for example, k, a, t, and you ask them, what was the first sound? What was that beginning sound? They're going to have a difficult time remembering what that beginning sound was. They also have difficulty remembering information long enough to take notes. So you're in a class with older students and you're lecturing, and they go to write things down and they can't remember what you just said to get it on the paper. They're going to forget steps in multi-step math problems, and they'll have problems focusing and maintaining attention, especially when you consider letters are moving around the page, numbers are moving around the page. I would find that difficult to pay attention. They struggle to remember what they've learned from day to day. So students with learning disabilities, they do receive special education if it is diagnosed, and there is that discrepancy between them. However, 69% of these students are going to spend at least 80% of their day in your classroom. So these are going to be the students you see on a regular basis. And so sometimes accommodations and or assistive technology, and I know we're going to be taking a look at more and more of that, they're going to help students to access what we call the general education curriculum. In other words, the standards that all the other students are reaching. These students also, though, are going to need intensive and explicit and individualized instruction in the areas where they struggle. Sometimes this can be done in the general education classroom. However, you'll oftentimes see students be pulled out for the intensive work on those things into different resource rooms. So these kids, they do have different challenges from their learning disabilities. They're going to have academic challenges, obviously, reading and or writing and or math, and they're going to need support skills in things like note taking and study skills and learning how to memorize, and then learning the concept of generalization. In other words, taking information you learned over in this instance and applying it over to this instance instead. And then they're going to have inconsistent performance. You'll see this up, down, high, lows. And they tend to have what's called a learned helplessness, frustration, lack of motivation, lack of confidence, where they believe, I've tried, I just can't do it. I'm not going to bother to try anymore, because oftentimes there will also be coexisting disabilities as well, which are causing other social issues. So what can we do as teachers to help these students? Because I know that's the bottom line. That's what you guys want to get to. First off, your academic instruction. And I know I sound like a broken record. You've heard this more times than you probably want to think about, but universal design for learning, hitting your learning in those different modalities so that the students are getting a more enriching learning environment, differentiating instruction based on strategies presented or requested in their IEPs or 504s, and then explicit instruction in the area of their deficit, teaching students different learning strategies such as mnemonics, and providing accommodations that are necessary and assistive technology in their classroom. Because UDL, I keep coming back to this, there are so many benefits. When you do this, you're presenting content in a variety of ways, and this is going to help students who have difficulty processing. If all you're doing is presenting information in an auditory format, the students who have difficult time with that listening comprehension are really going to struggle. So we want to present things in kinesthetic and visual ways as well. Give students options for demonstrating knowledge. It helps those students who have difficulty writing and organizing their ideas, and have engaging and motivating activities that help students to connect in the classroom and believe that they can be successful. But you may ask, if you're doing all this for universal design for learning, why would students need accommodations? Well, there's a couple things to consider. While this is like ultimate good teaching practice, not all teachers implement universal design for learning. And even teachers who do, they may not use it in every class session. We're not perfect. UDL, it's going to reduce barriers to learning, but it's not going to address the needs of every single student. That's where those accommodations come into play. So If you're looking, what would be some early warning signs of a possible learning disability? Well, difficulty with phonemic and phonological awareness and rapid letter naming, difficulty holding a pencil, forming letters, or spacing even between the letters, difficulty counting objects, reading numbers, but effective instruction is going to help a lot of these students. So high quality general ed instruction in your room, those principles of UDL, use of accommodations, explicit reading instruction, and explicit instruction in different learning strategies. Now, these students more and more and more are moving into colleges, which is awesome. They are so capable of success. And so when these students go into college, and maybe you're one of these students who has a learning disability. So having those study skills, how to learn is so important. Utilizing graphic organizers, learning how to take notes, using mnemonics to help you memorize things, organizational skills, time management, self-regulation, all these are so important. But to me, one of the most important is that self-advocacy skill, knowing what your disability is, knowing what you need to be successful, and then being able to explain that to other people that this is what you need. And remember, not all colleges are the same. Toccoa Falls, I feel, and I may be partial and you may be right, does an excellent job of meeting students where they are for disabilities. One of my daughters goes to a different school where I really feel it is lacking in the support and structure that they give her. So it's different from college to college. So how do kids transition from high school to college? Well, most of these kids are going to have IEPs throughout high school. However, Section 504, that Rehabilitation Act, prohibits discrimination and guarantees accommodations throughout life, not just in school. So college services are provided through the Office of Disability, which aligns with Section 504. So in college, you may be allowed to have test taking help. In other words, a separate room or extended time, note takers, an alternative place to take exams. And some of these students are allowed additional assistive technology. Colleges will sometimes offer workshops on time management and study skills, or workshops and programs for students with disabilities. Now, these assistive technology, this can be a wide range. We've got things that are what we call low tech. So reading guides, if you've ever seen the colored strips of paper that you put over top of your words, and all it does is change the background from a harsh black print on a white background to maybe a softer yellow or a pale blue. It just makes it easier for students to read. To things like pencil grips, knowing how to hold a pencil and having a grip put in place to help you do that. To high tech, speech to text or text to speech software, audio recorders, speech recognition, calculators. All of these are considered more of the high-tech ways of having assisted technology. So these are things that you can consider as you're helping your students.